A tiny little bit of a sore throat. I'm wondering if I might not manage to catch myself a bit of Omicron.
It is very contagious. We're
Yeah,
saying everyone's
I hardly ever
it.
go out anywhere or see anyone, but you know, who knows? But yeah, I mean, I almost hope I do. If I do, I'd like to get it documented, because in a lot of places, proof of previous infection is good enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that'll become more the norm. I mean, it's certainly not now, but it makes a lot of sense. It's one of the things that they
absolutely. Well, this was another thing that came up in both of their interviews, was the complete how ridiculous it is that we're not taking into account natural immunity, that we're forcing people to get vaccinated who have got natural immunity, and that study after study after study after study is coming in reaffirming that naturally acquired immunity is X times to X times more, you know, robust, long lasting, you know.
Yep.
And one of them said, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but my understanding of virology is at least somewhat, I don't know about the numbers true, but the idea is certainly true, that the vaccine only trains your immune system to recognize one site on the virus to attack, whereas your natural immunity apparently recognizes 27 different sites on the virus to attack, right? So, you know, this is why there is so much cross-transference of immunity between similar pathogens, because it doesn't just recognize one part of it, it recognizes many parts of it. And so parts which are, you know, the same from one pathogen to another, even though they vary in some ways, they have enough similarities that the immune system can still recognize them as pathogens and respond to them. Right.
I'm not sure, I'm sure there's some data on this, but it just kind of makes a certain amount of common sense that an actual virus would elicit a response that would be more likely to work on variants, because they're going to retain a lot of the same stuff in addition to the changes, rather than focusing on like one thing like a spike protein that can change and then having to reconfigure the vaccine, boosters or whatever. Yeah.
From what I understand, exposure to Omicron gives you retrospective immunity to Alpha and Delta, but that infection from Alpha or Delta does not confer immunity to Omicron. This is what Peter McCullough confirmed through Robert Malone. Yeah, he sent a message via Robert, rang him out and say, when you go on Joe Rogan, make sure you say this, right? That you can get reinfected with Omicron if you've had Alpha or Delta. But not supposedly the other way around. So yeah, that'd be great if I've got Omicron. That means I'm
it's as good as, well, there was some, it was a joke, I forget where I heard it, but the notion that Omicron is actually could it actually be a vaccine that they're putting just out into
I have mentioned that idea. I don't know if it was me that you heard it from, but I have mentioned
maybe it was during one of our meetings.
Right, what else have I got here? Let me have a look through my list. I've got this thing of gatekeeping. They spent a bit of time talking about gatekeeping, and yeah, maybe this is a good place to pick up, because this has actually already come up earlier in the discussion. I'd quite like to pick up on this thread again. So Zubin said of himself that like, for example, one gatekeeping decision he had made was not to invite onto his podcast, I can't remember what the doctor's name was, but a doctor who was going to present a very standard version of the thesis position, right? And he felt there's no point in doing that, because it's not interesting, because that's out there all over the place, right? And doesn't need reiterating one more time by him. And so he prefers to get on guests who have different things to say, but are not crazy, right? And I was thinking, I think that's a reasonable synopsis of what he said. And I was thinking, well, how is that any different to Joe Rogan? You just have slightly different places where you draw your line of who's crazy and who's not, right? I mean, it's exactly the same thing that Joe Rogan does. He just draws his crazy line a little bit further over there than you do. That's it. That's it.
So the difference, I think, would be that very similar stances as far as wanting to talk to interesting people, or people who don't, aren't representing something that's already out there, very, very common or understood. The difference is that in these particular two interviews, Rogan, doesn't have the background to push back when they go overboard with any claims, which is why he would advocate. And there's a bit about how do we incentivize synthesis?
Yeah, that was a good question. I like that thread that they picked on. That was a good question. How do you incentivize it? There's no market for synthesis was the phrase that they used, which I think that's a really good point. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So I think you're right as far as like the orientation of Rogan and Zubin is similar in terms of who they bring on. It's like, who's interesting to talk to and isn't representing something that's already out there a lot. And yeah, just the difference is, so it's not that Rogan draws a line that's more on the crazy end. It's just that he, within certain fields, doesn't know enough to know whether it's tipping into crazy land in that particular field.
But but that's what I mean. That's the post-game analysis job to do that, right? That's not Rogan's job to do that. And Rogan did push back a couple of times, although not very strongly. But like I said to you earlier, the pushback actually came from the other direction. No, Joe, that we can't conclude that, right? On several occasions, both of them did that. So yeah, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that point that he's not qualified to push back against these people, therefore he shouldn't have them on. I don't think that's fair.
Oh no, I don't think that they're saying that either, and I wouldn't say that either. It's just if a responsible person comes to realize that they've given, they've amplified some views that are not helpful or maybe problematic, because some people are seriously like following Malone's advice in certain areas where it's not actually helpful, because and they talk about this, the kind of like, once it's pretty easy if you like believed in one story and then you find that it's incorrect, and there's somebody with this sort of like teacherly authority or whatever sort of seeming authority because of their credentials and their experience and the way they communicate, and it's like, okay, I'm going to shift completely from what I believed before to this, and any sense in which it goes overboard, there's no filter possible, because it's just like, I've learned now that this is the truth, and so that's just one factor that can be a problem.
No, I think that's fair, but I mean, as Rogan pointed out, have you seen his response video, his 8 or 9 minute response video where as he pointed out in that, wisdom changes over time. 6 months ago, you couldn't say, I think that it's possible that this virus came from a lab, whereas now you can, right? That things that were definitely wrong and couldn't be talked about and were misinformation subsequently become accepted wisdom, right? And so who's to say what of today's taboos will be tomorrow's accepted wisdom, right? Who's to say that? And this is his point, right? This is why he gets to explore these things. It's not, I really don't see that because he can't stop them going too far, that therefore it's irresponsible of him to have them on. I really don't see that that's a fair argument, because who's to say what's going too far? We just don't know what we're going to know tomorrow, or what we're going to accept that we can talk about tomorrow, right?
I mean, I certainly don't disagree. It just seems like the synthesis or sort of moving in a productive direction is acknowledging if anything has been potentially harmful as far as what's been amplified, and then aiming to, if there's anything corrective that can be done, like, again, a responsible person like Joe, just naturally having heard the pushback is inclined to say, I'm going to consider this and try to bring more balance in the future. And they actually, like Zubin has not recommended, but suggested some guests that would be good for. One was for Malone, and I think he would also like to see like Vinay Prasad.
Yeah,
somebody
Vinay
like
Prasad.
that.
He mentioned him a few times. I'm not actually familiar with this chap. I haven't seen any of his work, so I can't comment on him. But I have. This is another question I have that I've written down in my notes here. Is why does Zubin not get Robert Malone onto his channel? I mean, they say that, oh, they won't engage with. Well, I see no evidence. Have they asked him? Have they sent him an email and requested, hey, you know, you've been getting a lot of pushback. We'd like to invite you on our show and put you on with, what was the chap's name he mentioned? The one who'd been labeled an anti-vaxxer?
Kirsch.
No. The guy that Zubin had on his podcast that had been labeled an anti-vaxxer that wasn't at all, right?
Oh yeah, Paul Offit.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah,
he's actually very pro-vaccine. He just said, you know, reasonably that he wouldn't want his booster
kids
for his
20-year-old. What was the other thing? There was two things: kids and.
I just had the note about his 20-year-old not getting a booster, and then being labeled an anti-vax. This binary thesis antithesis understanding is so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really poisonous. Yeah, so why does Zubin not get those two on his show, or why does David not get those two on his show? And the thing is, and I'm pretty sure I've heard David say this, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not 100% certain of this, but I'm pretty sure I've heard David say that he would not, in fact, even if he did, if he gave a platform on YouTube to Robert Malone, that's it, he'd get a strike, right? It doesn't matter what Robert Malone says on that. So David, in a way, can't invite Robert Malone or Peter McCullough onto his channel because it's not in his commercial interest to do so, right? It could cost him everything, potentially. It could cost him his entire venture. Well, not his entire venture. He's branched out a little bit now. He's got other things, but nevertheless, it would be a significant. And I don't know if the same might apply to Zubin, or maybe Zubin and David would not find giving people like Robert Malone. This is another thing I want to pick up on this language. People like Robert Malone, right? But would he be willing to bring him onto his channel? The point being to put him up against someone who will challenge him so that they can actually hash it out.
I believe David Fuller said something about that in either this interview or another one. Maybe it was makes more sense it would have been this one, not the religious wars one. But yeah, it sounds like he was trying to arrange these, not debates, but like discussions with some of the more heterodox.
Well, he was suggesting that Joe Rogan should do it, that Joe Rogan is in a good position to do this kind of thing. I remember him talking about that.
Yeah, and also, right. I think that was around was that around the incentivizing synthesis, and maybe Rogan could participate in that by bringing on, because he does that sometimes. He'll have, you know, multiple guests. And yeah, one of those could be somebody like Malone, and maybe somebody like Vinay Prasad, or but yeah, it's the more general question about how do we incentivize getting, you know, synthesis, having good faith dialogue and being able to shift off positions and maybe find more common ground. It's a proposal from kind of afar, from somebody who's not really in Rogan's orbit, but you know, who knows, maybe it'll kind of seep through things and Rogan will consider it. He may already be thinking about it. I mean, given his Instagram response.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, and maybe, and good luck to him if he wants to take that on. But I would still, it's not his responsibility. If he chooses to do it, then good luck to him. But we shouldn't criticize him if he chooses not to either, right? Is kind of what I'm saying, I guess.
Again, the whole thing with his podcast being like him following his authentic, you know, curiosity and interest.
Yeah.
Like I don't think he wants to be a medical facts debate show or fact figuring out show. But I don't know, given just how much this whole thing is blown up, he's probably somewhat motivated to I don't know, whether it's seen as like an olive branch or whatever, but just to try to make it some move, some distance to.
I think he got it. I think he got it exactly right in his little video. He held out an olive branch. I will try and do better. I will try and get, you know, like a direct counterpoint on immediately afterwards. When I have someone on who's controversial, I'll get a counterpoint on immediately afterwards, or even at the same time, right? Would be great. But yeah, so on this thing, they talked for a few minutes about the fact that these people will not put themselves forward for serious scrutiny, right? They won't put themselves in a position where they're going to be challenged. They're all softball interviews, and fair enough, they are all softball interviews. But two things on this: firstly, where else can they go, right? There are no orthodoxy platforms that will give them the time of day and let them come on and be challenged, right? So that's thing number one. Like, where are the offers from there? Now they go on to say that I've written down a couple of phrases which I take issue with the phraseology, and maybe we can move into this as a theme in a minute, the idea of phraseology, the way language is used in several places. So firstly, these actors are not willing to be directly challenged. They say they are, but the truth is they are not. Now, where is his evidence for saying this? This is quite a strong accusation, right? Like, they say they're willing to be challenged. They say, bring it on. Yeah, we're willing, but the truth is that they are not. Okay, so based on what evidence are you declaring this to be the truth, right? And yeah, so that was Zubin who made that declaration, and then David said something along these lines as well. I don't know if I've got it written down. Oh yeah. This is where he goes on. They're all financially involved with each other. Firstly, so what if they are? Does that mean that what they're saying is not true? I don't necessarily mean it. I think it does mean that. And also, if we're worried about people being financially involved with each other, what about all the financial conflicts of interest of all the senior public health officials? You know what I mean? Like, you know, that we can't say that they are legitimate voices and these people aren't because they have financial interests with each other. Well, hang on a minute, right? Let's apply the same standards.
In that case, I think, and I see why. I mean, again, it's like your perspective tends to see because it is, you know, coming from the dominant narrative. It only points out the flaws in the other side, whereas I think from, like, say, an alt middle or sense maker perspective like Rebel Wisdom and Z-Dog, it's, I mean, they can point to it on both sides, right? It's like financial incentives in a whatever relatively small interest circle, that can be an issue in any dynamic, and it's an issue with say pharmaceutical companies and government and media. And it can be an issue with this small group of antithesis voices that goes overboard in some respects, and we have to, or it makes sense to try to pick out the wheat from the chaff on that.
The implication is also that they're somehow making money out of colluding with each other in promoting the antithesis position, right? This is the implication. I mean, that's not actually explicitly stated, but the implication is something along those lines. Would you agree that it implies something along those lines?
Yeah, and it's even explicit in the sense that I think Zubin mentioned at one point that, or no, someone mentions that, yeah, it is Zubin. It actually has sort of made the careers of some of them that are claiming that their careers have been ruined. It's like they were,
well, McCullough didn't need his career making.
They're on Fox News and like all these other outlets and actually, more famous and making money. So there's a little bit of it's just interesting to look at the incentives, right? It's like there's this emotional.
I completely agree. Incentives are always important to examine. I completely agree. However, and this is according to what they said, right? But according to what they said on these interviews, Peter McCullough is actually in deep financial trouble at the moment because he's being sued and he's having to defend himself. And so all of his money is going on legal fees. He did not need his career resurrecting, right? I mean, he is, and Joe Rogan has confirmed this subsequent to the interview, so I have no doubt he has fact-checked it, the most published man in his field ever, right? So this is not a man whose career was waning and needed resurrection, right? I don't know to what degree that may or may not be true of Robert Malone, but Robert Malone declared on the Joe Rogan podcast that he has no financial interests in all of this, right? That he's got a farm that he's paid for, and he raises horses, and he loves his wife, and he loves his children, and he would not choose to do this, right? This is a horrible thing to be doing, not a nice thing to be doing. This is not about self-promotion. This is not about self-aggrandizement. This is not about money. He declared this quite unequivocally, and again, my lens, my biases, I believed him.
Yeah, and that may be completely legit too. If there's still the fact that, well, as they mentioned, I don't know where this came from, but I mean, I generally trust that they are taking it from a reliable source. That his wife said something about he basically was traumatized by the fact that
I looked into this. So again, Rebel Wisdom have been very naughty here. They've mischaracterized. It's not untrue. It's not untrue, but they have mischaracterized the nature of this. I've read a letter from his wife. I think I've got the page open so I can put a link in the chat for you, and I will put it in the show notes as well. So this is written by his wife. Anyway, during that, she acknowledges that she says PTSD, but the cause of the PTSD was abusive behavior suffered at the hands of his thesis advisor when he was doing his postdoctorate work. His postgraduate work. So yeah, it goes way back before and she does go on to explain how his discoveries were commandeered by others and claimed by others and whatever, and that he is bitter about it, but had long ago let it go, and it is only resurfaced now because of all of this, right? He'd long ago just, fuck it, let it go, right? So yeah, they have really mischaracterized that the PTSD is a consequence of feeling left out of the historical narrative of the development of RNA vaccines. It goes it goes well back before that, the PTSD. So yeah, very, very, very naughty. According to his wife's account. Listen, I can't vouch for how truthful or factually accurate his wife's account is, but according to his wife's account. And they referenced his wife, which is why I looked up stuff that his wife had written about him.
What are your thoughts on the way that Malone tends to overrepresent his? He basically calls himself the inventor of mRNA vaccines when he had a contributing role kind of back that led to other.
What he's saying is that he had a seminal role, right? That's really what he's saying. Is he had a seminal role in creating the underlying architecture, which has subsequently come to be used for mRNA. And in his wife's account, I can't remember all the details clearly, but as I say, I'll put the link in the chat. People can read it for themselves. But in his wife's account, she names a doctor who, in the media, claimed credit for things which Robert Malone for key steps in the process, which Robert Malone had actually done, which she claimed credit for. So yeah, listen, I don't know the truth of the story. What I do think I know, at least according to his wife's account, is that the PTSD is nothing to do with having been robbed of his role in history, but was the consequence of abusive behavior suffered at the hands of a particular individual who has subsequently become well known for abusive behavior of colleagues and students.
Maybe.
Anyway, so while we're on this theme of, in my opinion, misuse of language and mischaracterization, I've written down a few examples. I don't know if I should play the clips or not. I think I will.
The way that they're manipulating the conversation, the way that they're shutting down genuine heterodox points, genuinely valid criticisms, it then opens up the possibility for people like Malone and McCullough and others to exploit those genuine perspectives.
I would imagine that David Fuller would consider that not the best choice of words.
I agree, but he doesn't only do it once. This is my point. For me, it's indicative of a pattern which is reflective of a deep bias of which he's unaware, right? And it's coming out in his unconscious use of language.
That's probably fair. He probably acknowledged it too. He mentioned something about being people criticize you're like a mainstream shill because you come from this background. It's like fair enough, but it's trying still trying to reach toward truth.
There's another one coming up.
Hundreds of thousands of people making medical decisions, partly influenced by someone like Robert Malone.
Yeah, so like Robert Malone is bad, and so someone like Rob, do you know what I mean? Like just this it's I find it pejoratively loaded language, as I say, unconscious, reflective of held attitudes and biases. Right, hang on, there's more.
Joe Rogan published The Truth last night with Robert Malone and Peter McCullough.
But yeah, he's sort of ad absurduming, right? Like he's using ridiculous tweets as a way to say that these people, yeah, because they are the subject of ridiculous tweets, they are extreme figures, right? Is sort of, again, the implication kind of thing. No?
Well, I think within the context of the whole thing that he's trying to say there is basically he's paraphrasing what he's seeing come under like the Twitter sphere or whatever, with people saying those kind of things. Basically it's that same dynamic where some people listen to, say, Malone and completely trust everything that he says because he seems authoritative. He is authoritative to a certain extent, but is bringing in some things that are incorrect and potentially harmful if people completely pay attention to him. And then on the Rogan comments, it's like this notion that now we found the truth. It's almost like that. Something that can happen with conspiracy theories where it's you're kind of all in on this one thing. Like he's shown the truth because there's no ability to filter just from watching the interview. Like it has to be contested by other people with authority, right? With the right credentials and authority.
Maybe I'm oversensitive to this stuff. I've got one more. See how this one lands for you. I've got just one more.
My experience has been that the Malones of this world are pretty loath to, and a lot of people in this country.
The Malones of this world. Throughout the piece, he has put these little digs in, which have no real substance, and yet create in the mind of the listener an undeniable image of these guys are bad actors, right? We don't like them. We shouldn't listen to them. They are. Do you know what I mean? It's insinuation. It's insubstantive insinuation. It's beneath him as a journalist.
I mean, I think I get the theme probably. The way it lands for me is, it seems legitimate. There are Malone is a well-known example, relatively well-known. There are other.
Why not just say bad players? Why not just say bad players? Opens the door to bad players.
For me, at least, it would be because I wouldn't. I don't think Fuller would say that Malone is a bad actor or a bad character. He just, through his experience and biases and perspectives, is putting stuff out there that some of it's wrong and so potentially harmful if people completely believe everything that he says. I think that's his main point. Well, again, like what's the full statement there?
I don't know. Maybe. Listen, it doesn't seem to bother you anywhere near so much as it bothers me. But this stuff seems to me to be ungrounded, unbased in any substantive evidence, ad hominem attacks. And I get what you're saying before, that they've unpacked their specific criticisms of what he said in previous videos. I'm telling from your reaction that you think I'm being oversensitive to this. Am I right in that?
Yeah, I think that certain statements are like jumping out at you and activating your polyvagal system a bit. So you're not, like, the full context of what he's saying, I think, he's not there trying to malign Malone, or not exactly. He's using Malone as an example of some experts who are going onto platforms and with their authority, making claims that are not true in some cases and potentially harmful. And yeah, just so the previous one was about some people's reactions where they're sort of all in on what Malone's saying because they don't have the ability to filter some of the chaff from the wheat. And then on this last one, he was saying, I think the rest of the
Malones of this world are loath to subject themselves to scrutiny or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And we didn't I didn't bring this up earlier, but in a previous interview, and Zubin may have some other things in mind, but at least with McCullough, I think it was, if he's going to debate somebody, he'll only do it with Steve Hirsch, which he doesn't do good faith debates. He just does like mile a minute talking, and
I haven't actually heard anyone other than him say that, but I'm familiar with it. And listen, that may be true, but that's not to say that that's that's a deal breaker, right? And that's McCullough, as I believe. That's not to say that Robert Malone, for example, wouldn't be willing to come in and have a dialogos with.
Yeah, it hasn't. Right.
My question is, have they tried? I mean, if they've tried and failed, then I would imagine, in fact, I'm dead 100% certain they would have said so in the piece. If they tried and been turned down, for sure they would have said so, because that would have been more evidence for the fact that these people are not willing to come onto a place where they might get pushed back at, right? But yeah, listen, I disagree with you, and I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this, but I disagree with you. I think these 4 or 5 instances that I've picked out there are indicative of a scorn for Robert Malone in particular. Peter McCullough seems to be spared the worst of it, but I get the sense that David has got it in for Robert Malone for some reason. Something has triggered him about Robert Malone, and he is, whether he's aware of it or not, those 4 or 5 things I've picked out, and I can't discount the possibility. This is me and my lens and my sensitivity. It absolutely could be that. But yeah, to undermine Malone's credibility was almost felt like the primary point of this piece to me.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, from my perspective, that might, that might be worth mulling over in terms of your, if there's, shadow work, maybe, I don't know. It's like, because, to me, it seems pretty clear. The point of the whole dialogue is around like good sense making and trying to identify, orthodoxy, heterodoxy, the whole wheat from the chaff thing. And so some of these comments, like they're landing in this triggering way for you, which is understandable if there's some reason that and maybe it's that thing we talked about earlier where you have some investment in, like, just, listen to the heterodox voices, don't just dismiss them. But that's not what they're doing here. They're really trying to be careful in threading the needle of, what's useful, what's signal, what's noise.
I think they think they're doing that, but I think they are more dismissive than they realize they are being. That's, as I say, that's the feeling I get. I suspect we're going to have to agree to disagree on this, but before you need to go, there's one more thing I just want to pick up on, as the sorting the wheat from the chaff. And, that one question is, what does it matter if people say things which are wrong, right? What does it matter? And you've already sort of covered this, that some of the things they're saying might be harmful. And I think it would be worth exploring, because again, this is something that's said, and listening to them could be harmful to people. Well, how exactly? What exactly what do we actually mean by that? Harmful in what way? Like, if people listened and took such and such action as a consequence of listening, what harm would ensue? And because we just sort of accept that the reason we have to be careful about what these people are saying is that it's misleading people, and it's misleading people in such a way that it could cause harm, right? Because otherwise, why do we really give a shit? People lie all the time, right? Like, misleading people goes on all the time. Unless it's causing harm on a large scale, why do we care? So what is that harm?
Yeah, that'd be a good thread to pull on. It actually gets into why people in the orthodox or thesis position do want to completely deplatform certain people. It's like, okay, well, if they listen to that, then, they might start listening to other things that don't agree with what we think is true. So then it's, and maybe with Malone McCullough specifically, it'd be hard to point to harm other than maybe, if it's vaccine hesitancy. Again, I'm somebody who's not, like, I don't buy all the official numbers around COVID deaths. A lot of it's dying with COVID, not of COVID. you know, the thesis position has always been to amplify pretty much anything that paints it as more dangerous. But even given that, my general sense is so many voices that I find trustworthy and well informed are, you know, saying that vaccines are effective against hospitalization and death. You know, and I have people close to me, my brother, who kind of focuses on things that are saying like, oh, but there's graphene in there that, you know, maybe they're intentionally trying to poison us and that kind of stuff. Which, you know, I pay attention to a bit, but I'm trying to pay attention to the whole like sense making web. And it's like, I feel like I'd be hearing that from more nodes if it was actually true. And yeah, so my sense right now is that vaccines are generally beneficial for the right populations at the right levels, not overdoing it with boosters and everything.
Yeah, oh God, there's so much to cover in all of this. I mean, this is another thing, is what is true, right? I mean, this is another thing that I'm pretty sure this was Robert Malone was talking about, is that an organization started by the BBC, what was it called? The True News Initiative or something like that, the True News Initiative, something like that, that was started by the BBC, and that, you know, news organizations all over the Western world signed up to. By definition, what public health agencies say is the truth, right? And anything which contradicts that is by definition misinformation, right? And so this was laid out quite early on in the pandemic, right? In order to spare the public the confusion of being exposed to misinformation, we declare ourselves the arbiters of what is true and declare ourselves qualified, justified in downplaying anything which is not true.
The hubris, right? I mean, Fauci referring to himself as being science basically at one point. I mean, it's I mean, obviously I mean, the cracks have been shown, at least for those who are sort of willing or able to see. But yeah, it continues. I guess, I mean, hopefully an outcome of this whole thing is that we'll take approaches that are more like what Japan did, where it's, you know, treat the citizens like adults, actually give them the information that we have at the time with recommendations, not mandates or obscuring some of the facts to just get people to sort of fall in line with a particular set of remedies or whatever. But yeah, we're certainly not there today.
Near the end of his interview, Robert Malone said, there are 2 hills I'm prepared to die on. And his 2 hills were vaccinating and in particularly boosting children. And the second one was freedom of speech. So on those 2 hills, I'm prepared to make any sacrifice, right? There is nothing which is getting me off. So you can call that intransigent and unwilling to change your position, or you can call that, you know, principled and this is my line, yeah, this far and no further. You do not cross this fucking line without getting serious resistance from me. So those as hills to die on, those sound like pretty worthy hills to die on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to agree with the like where he's coming from with that, like concern for care for children and for free speech are, you know, both really important. And given his beliefs, again, like, I don't think Zubin or Rebel Wisdom are accusing McCullough or Malone of lying at any point. They bought into what they're saying. It's just that in some of it's.
Sorry, but you've just done it there. Yeah, your choice of language. They bought into what they're saying. By using the phrase "bought in," there is an assumption that what they bought into is a scam, right? There's no allowance for the possibility that what they bought into is actually maybe a truth which we have not yet reached a point where we can accept. Just that, you know, that might be a possibility. That maybe
the point, the main point, it was just they're not lying. They believe what they're saying from their perspective. And yeah, from Malone, you know, the way he's parsed the information, he believes that it's very negative for kids, and so yeah, he's willing to die on that hill.
This is maybe a good point. This is maybe a good place to end on, right? So tell me if you agree with this. It feels to me you are qualified to speak in public if A, you believe what you are saying, right? So as far as you're concerned, you are being truthful. And B, you are qualified to speak in public in the domain that you're speaking in. And for me, both of these guys tick both of those boxes, and therefore they should.
I would go further. I would go further as far as the public square. I think if you want to go out there and lie, like you can do that.
What
it's
you can,
not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ethics. There's ethical considerations and everything. But the thing with free speech, and I wouldn't call myself an absolutist, but I would lean more in that direction of like have more dialogue to figure out truth rather than trying to shut off, because then it turns into shadow usually, like unacknowledged parts of the noosphere or the collective consciousness, and then it manifests in messed up ways.
Yeah, no, I think what I meant more, anyone, of course, is qualified to speak in public about anything at all. That's what freedom of speech is, right? Yeah, sorry, I said what I meant badly. What I meant was someone should be afforded the benefit of the doubt and given the assumption of credibility if they are A, being truthful to the best of their knowledge, right? If they are A, being truthful, and B, have expertise in whatever it is that they're talking about, right? If they are doing those two, if those two boxes are ticked, as far as I'm concerned, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to restrain what's being, and so, you know, what they are saying should be carefully scrutinized for what is and is not signal, and the signal should be followed up on because these guys know what they're talking about.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the thing that seems to be missing, at least so far, is engagement. So they're bringing a heterodox perspective that some are saying gets some things wrong. It's like, will they engage to maybe suss out or sort out?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? That's the question, and that is places like Rebel Wisdom. That, as far as I'm concerned, that's their job at times like these, right? That's exactly their job, is to be a place where that kind of dialogue can happen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure David Fuller mentioned reaching out to, I think it was Malone and or McCulloch, to try to do something like that, and didn't happen. But yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. I think, maybe Rogan will have some contributions in that space too.
Yeah, I mean, I'd pay money to see that. I tell you what, I would pay money to see. No, I would really
put it on a pay-per-view.
No, I would really, because like I said at the very, very start, neither of them came across to me as the type of people who would say things with any degree of assuredness or certainty unless that assuredness or certainty was justified, right? And
according to their analysis, they believe what they're saying. Some people disagree.
And not only they believe what they're saying, but they believe they have more than sufficient evidence for their level of certainty about what they're saying, right? Well, whatever their level of certainty is in the language that they're using, they believe that they are more than justified in that level of certainty. I mean, Peter McCullough was challenged on this. 85% of he was very, very, very clear. Now, whether he's right or not, I don't know, but he's very clear. He said back in August of 2019 that 50% of the COVID patients that have died so far could have been saved with early treatment, and then up that number to 85% sometime later on in 2020, right? And he reaffirmed those numbers, right? Where on other occasions he was unwilling to commit himself to a particular number or ratio or percentage, right? I don't know, but on this he was unequivocal in his assessment. Now, he may be wrong, he may be right, but whether it's 85% or 60% or 40% or 30%, if say it's a third of what he said, right? If 25-30% of the patients could have been saved, then that is a really big deal. We need to know that so that we can do better next time, right? I mean, God, why are we not thinking like that? It just does my head in. Without trying to blame anyone for anything or put anyone in jail or anything like that, just so that we can do better next time.
Yeah, no disagreement. I do have to hop at this other meeting.
Yeah. No worries.
We'll pick this up. When we'll figure out a time. So
Monday or Tuesday, perhaps. Take it easy.